Suikoden was originally released on December of 1995 in Japan. Exactly 1 year later, it was released in North America. Europe got it until April of 1997. Ports were made exclusively in Japan for Windows, Sega Saturn, and PSP. Later, it was digitally re-released on the PlayStation Store, and finally a few weeks ago, a remaster on modern systems. I'm telling you all this info so you can see how many times this game has been re-released. It was always a big deal in Japan, but it didn't become one overseas until the internet and social media rescued it from these shadows. Created by mastermind Yoshitaka Murayama, deceased last year sadly, influenced by series such as Civilization and Land Greaser, loosely based on one of the classic Chinese novels called Water Margin, which tells the story of 108 heroes fighting a corrupt sovereign state. Well, this game follows a very similar plot when protagonist Tyr McDowell joins the Scarlet Moon Empire by recommendation of his father, a general. But upon discovering that the Empire is oppressing its people with heavy taxes, he also finds out they're after one of the 27 true runes. In this case, the Soul Eater, which Tyr acquires, being then forced to flee the Empire, so he and his companions eventually get saved and recruited by the Liberation Army to fight the oppressive Empire. So you see, it's almost identical to the plot of the book, and you do go out there to recruit 108 heroes, except in this game, not all of those heroes fight, some are merely cooks or clerks or attendants, etc. The story was left intact in the remaster, no alterations were done at least in terms of narrative. The original translation was okay at best, with some grammar errors and dumb sentences. Allegedly, the remaster fixed the translation, making it more faithful to the original Japanese script. Unfortunately, its censorship carried over and even more was added to it, like the removal of religious themes or characters being crucified now being merely tied up in a log like these two guys. The classic "I don't wanna" answer to the first choice of the game is now more faithful to the original Japanese script, with a new line that makes it boring. So stuff like this can be found throughout the game, both good and bad. Surprisingly, there are no hidden modern agendas inserted into the dialogue, which I'm very grateful for. Now, the game plays within a traditional style, as in going from town to town with an overworld and several dungeons in between. Random encounters can be found all around, but with a rate that's mostly balanced. The remaster did not get rid of this, leaving the encounter rate intact. The graphics were good looking for its time, but I never felt the environments or pixel art was that beautiful, at least not until its sequel. The remaster fixed all of that and obviously embellished the visuals to look stunning. But I feel they honestly could have done better. Not the best remaster out there in terms of graphics, but it definitely looks prettier than the original. Going back to the gameplay, you already know the game has two different endings depending on the characters you recruit. If you're planning on getting them all, you absolutely need a guide for any version. There aren't any hints on how to recruit some characters, not even in the remaster. Besides, recruiting can still be quite cryptic even if you encounter these characters out there. Some you'll have to duel, others will send you on side quests, others have specific requirements, etc. So yeah, a guide is indispensable for this. Regardless, whether you set out for one ending or the other, the game's pretty damn short. Beatable between 10 to 15 hours, a maximum of 20 if you senselessly decide to grind or explore a lot. The remaster did not add anything new like areas or story or characters, no. And speaking about exploration, the remaster lets you run around, even diagonally, something all previous versions didn't have. Now, Suikoden has a turn-based battle system with up to 6 playable characters at once. A minimal formation system exists with 3 characters at front and 3 behind. Obviously, it's best to leave your mages and archers behind. At the beginning of a battle, you choose everyone's turn first and hope for the RNG to do you justice when it starts, because often the characters with the highest agility stat will act first. But sometimes it's just freaking random. This can screw you over pretty badly. No, the remaster didn't fix this RNG issue, so the game can be a bit difficult and spiky every now and then for something that isn't even your fault. Items can be used, but each character has to equip them individually and the space is limited. There's no NP system, instead you have runes that you can equip your characters with, some with passive skills, but most with active skills like magic. All of these have a limited number of uses, but as you level up, they will increase a bit. You'd be surprised to know not a single Suikoden game ever has difficulty settings. Not even the spin-offs. But the remaster of this game included them. However, unless you're gonna use easy mode for grinding, I do not recommend it, as it does make everything too easy. Hard mode is, well, a bit hard but not insanely hard, so it's doable. The remaster also added a fast forward feature, but only a double speed. It doesn't make battles that fast, to be honest, but it helps if you get into a lot of battles often. The game also has two additional battle mechanics. The first one is the duels, with only a small handful of them found throughout the adventure. They play under a rock paper scissors mechanic where one action tops the other. You have to guess which action your enemy will choose by reading what they're saying. Often it can be quite cryptic to guess, but sometimes, actually most of the time, it's easy to tell. The easy mode in the remaster doesn't make these duels easier, you just get less damage if you mess up, that's all. Strategy battles are also present, just keep in mind this is the first game in this series, so while unique, they aren't that interesting. Basically, you command a bunch of groups of characters, each with a different specialty like archery or magic. One specialty is better against certain types of groups of enemies and so on, you get the idea. You can also have certain extra characters to send to gather info on what the enemy is gonna do next. Upon choosing which group will fight which, this animation will play out. The goal of most strategy battles is to defeat every single enemy group and leader, or just reduce their HP to a certain amount. They aren't that difficult, but you should know there is perma-death for some of the characters if their entire group gets defeated. And no, the remaster did not change this. The music in this game was done by various composers led by Miki Higashino. It's legendary, unique, perpetually offering sounds that mix ancient lore with culture and fantasy. It's honestly an excellent soundtrack. Anything new on the remaster? Nope. Sound has been adjusted for modern devices, but nothing was rearranged or anything. So, overall, this is an excellent RPG. Not quite the masterpiece it probably should have been back then, but extremely unique for its time. Highly recommended. Now, let's move on to Suikoden 2 before I give you my final thoughts on both remasters. Suikoden 2 also released on all the same systems as 1 throughout the years, also spearheaded by Yoshitaka Murayama. This is basically his masterpiece out of the 3 Suikoden games he worked on. The game, however, had a localization hell when it came out, and as a result, very few copies were printed outside of Japan, where it was a huge success. Overseas though, nobody knew it, it sold poorly and the game became super rare and expensive. It still is nowadays, and I don't think the remaster will affect its current price that much. Now, you should know this is a direct sequel to the first game, but with its own story, characters and conflict. However, characters such as Victor and Flick, for example, return and spoil things from the previous game, so while not indispensable, it is still highly recommended to play the first game first. This sequel tells the story of 2 young soldiers from Highland, Ryo and Joey, who witness a betrayal of a peace pact between 2 nations led by the Mad Prince Luca Blight. So upon escaping, they join Victor's mercenary group that will eventually become the Liberation Army again to put a stop to Luca Blight. Of course, both characters soon earn one of the 27 true runes each and go their separate ways to become enemies. It's a much more powerful and well-written story than the first game, with more impactful moments and tragedies. Once again, the new translation appears to be more faithful to the original Japanese script and helps reduce the ridiculousness the original had. I mean it! The original release had a terrible translation full of grammar mistakes and nonsensical lines. Allegedly, most of that has been fixed here. Any censorship? Yes, unfortunately. Most of the blood has been colored black. Probably because of the sensitivities in Japan, since no one in the West cares about that. Religious symbols have been altered as well, some alcohol references are toned down, but some strangely remain intact, and the character Richmond no longer smokes. You know, minor details really, but censorship is still censorship and it's wrong. They shouldn't have added any of this, it's freaking pathetic to be honest. However, the humiliating, politically incorrect dialogue is still present, especially the legendary lines by Lookup Light, though one weird example is that instead of saying "die, pig," he now says "die, you pig," which I believe makes it less impactful. But anyways, I didn't notice any modern agendas like in the Eiyuden Chronicle fiasco from last year, but if you did notice something, please leave a comment. The graphics looked gorgeous in the original, so now the remaster made them even prettier. Nevertheless, there's nothing that impressive, just a decent embellishment of the backgrounds and pixels. I didn't say anything about the new art style in the first Suikoden, but I want you to know that it's also present here. Character portraits and UI have been improved in HD, and since I got so used to the menu interface from the original versions, it took me a while to get used to the new ones. But they're alright, I guess. The new character portraits though? Well, I like some and dislike others. It's a mixed bag. I really do believe it changed my perspective a bit on some characters. The music did not disappoint whatsoever. Miki Higashino is back, but this time only with one extra composer, Keiko Fukami. Excellent soundtrack carrying over the same vibes as its predecessor with intense themes, ancient sounds and fantasy lore, alongside a plethora of peaceful and relaxing tunes. I think this game has the best music in the entire series. The gameplay in this game is a bit better than its predecessor. It's also traditional town-to-town, overworld random encounters, etc. Minigames exist in both games, which are a highlight in the series, especially since some of them are mandatory to recruit certain characters. So this sequel is also based on recruiting 108 characters, and the ending is even more sad if you don't get them all, but there's 4 different endings now, most of them relying on recruiting every character. Some glitches on tricks that were either good or bad have been destroyed. The Matilda border, for example, is gone, sadly. However, the Clive quest still has a time limit, but there's now a post-event timer that helps. There are more, but it'll take me a long time to go through them all and explain what they mean. I'm sure you can find more info online. The same battle system is back with 6 party members, same rules apply as before, including rune usage limit for magic and RNG screwing you over sometimes in the turn order. This sequel also has difficulty settings, but again, the games were rebalanced, so I suggest you forget about the easy mode. Even normal feels slightly easier than the original actually. New battle animations for spells and unite attacks are featured in the Remastered. Just like with the character portraits, I like some and dislike others. I'm not even sure why this was necessary, to be honest. The duels in Suikoden 2 are a small improvement over the first one, but the system remains the same. You still have to guess what the enemy's action will be next, so you can counter appropriately. Remember that in both games you have blacksmiths that increase the attack power of your weapon, so always give your main character priority because it's really useful for any duel out there. The strategy battles in Suikoden 2 are completely different from the ones in before. In here you move groups of characters on grids, like in a tactics game. Their range depends on which units are the leader. Of course, mounted units have a bigger range. Fighting an enemy leads to this short animation, and the same rock paper scissors mechanic apply with strengths and weaknesses and all that jazz. I personally like this system way more than in the first one, as it feels more organic, more fleshed out, and there's more room for better strategies. However, once again, permadeath exists for some of the recruitable characters, so keep that in mind. Overall, I think Suikoden 2 is a bit more challenging than the first one on every area, but it's a far longer game, twice as long actually, offering at least 25 hours of playtime if you focus on the main story, obviously way more if you do everything else. This game is a masterpiece with very few flaws, completely toppled by the many excellent features it has. You already know, I strongly recommend it. Alright, so my opinion on the remasters, my conclusion. Sadly, if you've been paying attention to every comparison I've done with the original versions, you've already noticed they're bare bones. Sure, the visuals are upscaled and they look great, but the quality of life features aren't enough. You can't fast forward during dialogue, only in battle, and it also speeds up the music. Running is cool, but it feels weird if you're super used to the original, and for some reason the controls aren't perfect, even though they should be, especially in the sequel, because in there you could run in the first place. Difficulty settings are welcomed, but since the games were rebalanced, only the hard mode makes sense and could be appealing for some. There's an autosave feature, but it's useless and poorly implemented since it mostly works when there's a save statue nearby, so what's the point? The Switch version has its usual frame drop issues, but that shouldn't be a surprise, although I would like to point out that this is the version I played. The censorship is beyond stupid, and unless you know Japanese, there's no way to vouch for the so-called more faithful to the original Japanese script claims. So in conclusion, I don't know, man. I'm not saying these remasters are lazy, but they could have been much better, especially without the dumb censorship. At least I didn't notice any modern bullshit agendas, but then again, if you did, let us know. Do not buy these remasters, wait for the price to drop considerably, or just emulate them, or emulate the originals, or stick to the originals. That's my recommendation. Not that these remasters are bad, they're good, but they are kinda wasted potential.